I would like to thank Deputy Murphy for bringing forward the Tax Transparency Bill 2012. And I have to say, Cian Corl, I regard it as a very welcome development that backbench TDs on the government side now have a forum to bring forward bills. I think that is something that we all welcome, and particularly in a government with a majority of the scale that the current coalition has, then I believe it is important that the voice of backbench TDs would be heard. And I welcome the publication of the bill and the fact that we have an opportunity of discussing it here in the House today. Cian Corley, there is no doubt whatsoever but that the Irish people are certainly demanding far more transparency in relation to how public money is spent. Given the scale of budgetary cutbacks and tax increases over the last 4 years, people are becoming extremely conscious now of where their taxes are going, and they do want to have very open information as to where that money is going. And any policy initiative or any decision that opens up the budgetary process and allows people an opportunity to meaningfully engage with the political process and allows people an opportunity to see where their money is going is something I think that broadly we would all welcome. And certainly I think there is an obligation on all of us in the House today to seek to make politics relevant, because there is no doubt but that many people feel very detached from the political system. They feel that what goes on in this House is not relevant to their daily lives. And that really is a very profound challenge that we, as a Parliament, are going to have to face up to try to get people to understand the relevance of decisions that are made here, particularly in relation to financial matters. When it comes to the estimates process, when it comes to the annual budget, for people to understand that decisions made here affect precisely how the money that they pay towards the running of this state are going to be spent. The specific measure proposed by Deputy Murphy essentially is to take the information that is already in the public domain in relation to how public money is spent, but to put that information down at the level of the individual. That is essentially what you are proposing, because there is already a great deal of information there in the public domain if people are of the mind to go looking for it, in terms of the detailed estimates, the budget document itself, the detailed tables that are attached to it. We have, of course, parliamentary questions, freedom of information. We have the annual and special reports from the Controller and Auditor General, for example. So the information is there, but the question is it beneficial in some way to present that information at the level of the individual, so that they can put into context how the money that they are paying is being spent by the state. And I think there is merit in the proposal. I have to say that in terms of my own position and the position of my party. People already get an annual P60, as Deputy Murphy will know, so they do see exactly how much income tax, how much universal social charge, how much PRSI, for example, that they are paying on an annual basis. But what they don't get to see at present is a breakdown of their contribution to the state in terms of precisely how that money is spent in terms of the running of the country. And that is essentially, I think, the essence of the bill that is being proposed by Deputy Murphy. And I thank Deputy Murphy for sending an indicative example earlier on today of the level of detail that you propose to go into, because that was certainly one of the questions I had. It would be very easy to extrapolate the overall level of government spending and apply it on a pro-rata basis to the amount of tax that each individual is paying. But I think the question is, to what level of detail do you go down? Do you just bring it down to the level of departmental spending, each individual vote, for example, to make the information really meaningful to people who are paying tax? I think that is a consideration that would certainly have to be borne in mind. And of course, a lot of money that is being spent by the state at the moment, 6.2 billion, for example, to the end of October, was spent on servicing the national debt. So we collected about 28 billion euro in respect of tax receipts for the 10 months to the end of October, and 6.2 billion of that went on paying off the national debt. So what you're proposing is that a proportionate amount of the taxes that people pay would be shown in terms of the individual statement sent to them in respect of the cost of servicing the national debt, and I think that is something that has merit. I suppose the fundamental question is, what is the underlying benefit of the proposal that the Deputy has brought forward? And I do have a concern, I have to say, in respect of the number of people currently who aren't paying any income tax. people who are currently unemployed. We have 434,000 people on the live register, for example, and we certainly don't want to in any way bring about a policy initiative that is divisive at this time. Because there are so many people who, through no fault of their own whatsoever, are not paying income tax at the present time. And if we are going to trigger a debate at the level of each individual as to how their money is being spent, then we do need to ask, how is it going to make people feel who aren't paying any income tax at this point in time? Their statement is going to look very different to the statement of a person who is currently in gainful employment and who is currently a payee worker. And that is a concern that I do have, and I think it's something, Deputy, that we do need to consider. The point that you make about showing people how much VAT and excise that they pay through the online calculator is a particularly relevant one, I have to say, because if you take, without being political about it, if you take the decision in the last budget, for example, to increase VAT by 2%, that probably cost most households €300, maybe €400, and really most people didn't bat an eyelid. You know, there certainly was a response from the retail sector and for people in business who were directly affected by the measure, but people didn't really see it as being terribly relevant because, of course, they pay it gradually over a period of time on each individual transaction. And then when you compare that, for example, to the introduction of a household charge, which was €100, and it provoked an enormous public reaction, and we've had a very high level of non-compliance, for example. And I think it does make budgetary decisions meaningful for people when you actually break down what the cost to them is of each individual measure. And certainly it would, I think, inform public debate far better about the decisions that we are making on budgetary matters if it was reduced down to that level. In respect of the publication, Ceann Comhairle, of purchase orders of over €5,000, that's something I have to say that I would welcome. We have had a litany of incidences of public money being wasted. You're a member of the PAC committee yourself, Deputy Murphy. I was in the past as well. And really, if members of the public sat through some of those hearings on a Thursday morning, they would be absolutely gobsmacked to see, in some cases, how public money is being spent and how it is being wasted. And to have information about public money being spent in excess of €5,000 in the public domain and accessible for every citizen, I think is a worthwhile objective and is one that we should pursue. You've discussed the issue of the cost, Deputy Murphy, and I think it would be quite simple really to extrapolate a model as to how this could be done. I don't believe that the cost would necessarily be overly burdensome. It is quite a simple formula that would need to be used, but certainly I look forward to the government's response as to what the potential cost of this measure would be. And really, in conclusion, what I would say to the government, Ceann Comhairle, is, you know, either accept this bill and move it forward, or reject it out of hand, because we've had a number of examples now in the last number of months where bills from the opposition, in some cases from government backbench TDs, have been accepted at second stage, and then they have been allowed to gather dust. And really, that, in my view, serves no useful purpose. And if the proceedings that we are having here this morning are to be relevant and are to be meaningful, then we should make a decision on this bill. The vote will be next week, if there is to be a vote, and either accept it and move it on to committee stage, and let's have a proper debate on the content of the bill, try to improve it and enact it, or else, if the government has no intention of accepting the bill, then just reject it out of hand. I think that would be the fairest thing to do for Deputy Murphy and for all of the deputies who have taken the time to be here today and to contribute to this debate. So I welcome, Ceann Comhairle, the opportunity of making a contribution. Fianna Fáil will support the bill at second stage, and we want it debated quite quickly at committee stage, Deputy Murphy. We want an opportunity to engage with you in considerable detail on certain aspects of the bill to see how it would work in practice and to address the concerns that we have about it being socially divisive, which I think is a key concern given the state of the economy and the individual state of finances that many families face at the present time. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you. Deputy Pearse Doherty, on behalf of Sinn Féin.
Ceann Comhairle. First of all, I'd like to indicate to the House that Sinn Féin will support this bill. And we in Sinn Féin have been a long advocate of more open and transparent government. We've brought forward legislation during this Dáil to bring that about. Unfortunately, the government parties have voted that down. But we firmly believe that the people have a right to know how the decisions that affect their lives are reached. We also believe that they have a right to know how their money is spent, not just on income tax, but right across all the other taxes. And it's probably a weakness in the legislation that it doesn't deal with the indirect taxes that Irish people pay on a day-to-day basis, although there is reference to VAT and excise. Of course, we would like to go much further than what's in the bill. We also believe in participatory government, giving people a greater say in how the decisions are met. Because of our commitment to open government and transparent government, we have no problem whatsoever in supporting the 3 principles contained in Deputy Murphy's tax transparency bill. The bill, as we know, proposes a facility where people could access a statement detailing the proportion of their income on various elements of government expenditure. And this is clear. There is clearly no reason, in our view, why people who want this information shouldn't have it. But I would say that I would stop short of Deputy Murphy's proposal that a copy of this information be sent out unsolicited to every taxpayer in the state, because this would have unnecessary cost on the Exchequer. However, an online calculator facility which was easily accessible to the public would be a cost-effective way of making this information available. And likewise, there is no reason to oppose Deputy Murphy's proposal for a VAT calculator on appropriate government websites. Some people will be interested in accessing such information, and they should be facilitated in doing so. From Sinn Féin's point of view, the most interesting provision in this bill, the most interesting of the 3, is the requirement to publish the detail of all purchasing orders over the value of €5,000. I think this is a very sensible suggestion and should be implemented absolutely immediately. When the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform started to publish details of purchase orders over the value of €20,000, Sinn Féin welcomed this step, while we argued that they should do more. They should do so for spends of lower amounts as well, and that's what's reflected in Deputy Murphy's proposal of €5,000, and it would be much better and should be applied to all government bodies. So, we've no problem in supporting the measures contained in the bill, and we will support them at second stage and at committee stage with reservations in relation to the unsolicited sending out of the information. But having said all that, and I think it's important to say this, I don't believe that any of these proposals actually require legislation. Nor do I believe that they are of such significance that we had to convene the National Parliament to discuss them here and agree them here today. These are the kind of things that any government committed to openness and transparency should be doing as a matter of course. The income tax statement and VAT calculators could be up and running within a matter of hours, not within a matter of months. And any department IT staff, or even, as Deputy Murphy mentioned, some of the Coach or Dojo kids could actually produce this within a couple of hours. The information exists. It's very, very simple. It's what percentage is spent of expenditure is on education, is on health, is on prisons, and so on. It's very, very, very simple. You input that information into an online calculator, which exists right throughout the world or online. You take one that's already there and you place it on a website. So it's something that could be done within a matter of hours. If by the time this debate concluded, if somebody was sitting at home, they could have had it done by then. Likewise, the publishing of purchasing orders could be implemented by a simple letter from the Minister of Finance to all the departments. So it isn't, in our view, very complicated issues, or it isn't the cutting edge of transparency. It's very much pretty basic stuff, and it should be routine. And I was also genuinely surprised when I read the bill. And again, I want to say that we support the bill and we support open government, but I was genuinely surprised that this was the topic that was chosen by Deputy Murphy's first piece of legislation. And I don't know much about the concerns of the people in his constituency, obviously, but at home in Donegal, the people are living with much heavier burdens. Every day, my office is contacted by people who are struggling to get by. People who are struggling to pay basic household bills, to pay their mortgages, and in some instances, even to feed their children. If Deputy Murphy does not believe me, then he should talk to the volunteer staff of St Vincent de Paul in any local branch, and they will tell him. Calls for assistance to the Society have increased over 80% since 2009, with 60% of calls coming from households with children. The Society made 400,000 visits to families struggling to make ends meet last year alone. Since 2008, relative and consistent poverty and child poverty has increased, income equality has increased, mortgage distress in crippling
I'd have
levels.
to ask you to stick to the content of the bill.
This is this is the context of the bill,
Not
and
the
this is the
context
second
of the bill
stage.
as presented.
It is
The
about,
second stage speech, and it relates to the bill before the House.
and this relates to the
Oh, sorry,
decisions that
Deputy,
government
that's
make
my
and,
ruling. Thank you.
open transparency, Count Corley.
Thank you, Deputy. You know exactly what I'm talking.
I know exactly, and that's what I'm addressing. It's about transparency. It's about the spirit of this bill, which we support, is about providing information to taxpayers about how decisions of government are made. It is about promoting a debate that Deputy Murphy mentioned in relation to what government's options are and what opposition parties are. And what I'm saying is that the people who represent me, who elected me to speak in this Parliament uninterrupted, are concerned about crippling mortgage interest, are about having to feed their children, and this isn't the issue that is of major concern to them. The overwhelming majority of people across the state are worried about finding work or keeping their job. They're worried about whether they or their children will have to immigrate. They're worried about how they will pay the rising cost of gas, electricity, petrol. They're worried about the rising cost of living, the rising cost of mortgages, and whether they will have enough money in their pockets to meet the bare essentials. And people are also angry to see massive payouts to bondholders, to lavish pensions, to former bankers and politicians, including many from Deputy Murphy's own party, which would not be itemised in the statement that he mentions. They see enormous sums of money poured into banks, including Anglo-Irish Bank. And they are also asking themselves how it is that the government can find the money for all of this, but can't find money for special needs assistance for our children or home help for
Deputy,
our
I won't
grandparents.
ask you again. I'm asking you to adhere to the rules of the House. You're entitled to address the bill before the House. You're straying into other matters which you're quite entitled to raise at any other given time. But we have a bill before the House. The contents of that bill is what's being discussed. Now, please respect the chair.
Count Corley,
We're not having a general debate on
made
the
your
economy.
point.
Thank you.
I would like to reply,
Thank
Count
you.
Corley, with due respect. This is a
Sorry, Deputy. It's my job to adhere to the rules. That's all I'm doing.
and I've listened to what you said, and this is a bill
I'll ask you
about
to adhere to it.
this is a bill about informing taxpayers of where government decisions
Yes, and
is.
it's quite
Deputy
clear.
Murphy has given an outline as to the information which I have that would be presented in the detail. None of that includes, for example, the billions that went into Anglo-Irish Bank, or the pensions to former politicians or former bankers. It is relevant to this piece of legislation. You may be uncomfortable, and people may be uncomfortable,
I'm not
but these are the
uncomfortable.
priorities. Well,
Yes,
let me please.
I'm not uncomfortable.
At second stage,
I'm asking
deal
you
with the
to
parameters
adhere
of this bill.
to the content of the bill before the House. That's all I'm asking you.
Carla, can I suggest that we issue to deputies a receipt showing how much time is actually spent on
Sorry,
issue?
Sorry, you don't need any help now from the sidelines. I'm asking the deputy to respect the chair and to continue his contribution in respect to that of the.
My
bill before
contribution
the
is
House.
relevant to this bill about open transparency and how decisions are being impacted, how decisions and the information that is sought by people. And what I am representing to this House is that while we welcome the spirit of this bill, this should be done as a matter of course. Build the calculator, put it on the website, have it done. And I think it is relevant to say that, I did find it strange that this is the issue that is before us. But I welcome the bill and I will support the bill. But the reality is, and I want to say this, because there is a cost to the Exchequer in relation to implementing this here, and it would be folly of me not to raise that matter. And what I am saying is that I believe that the people who voted for me are more concerned of whether they will have enough money to survive at the end of the month. And I am sure that they would like to know where their taxes go, but first they want to know where the income they and their families need to survive will come from. So the issues in relation to the bill don't go far enough, because it doesn't show people, for example, in relation to other indirect taxations, it doesn't go deep enough. For example, what really people are exercised about is like how many government ministers last year availed of tax write-downs using the dual abode allowance. That's what people are exercised about, not just the broad headlines of how much goes into education, how much goes into health. What they want to go down is into the nitty-gritty, wasteful spend by government departments, wasteful spend by government ministers, looking at reports, for example, that have been commissioned at huge costs and haven't been implemented. How much did it cost the government to fly to Berlin to pick up his award as European of the Year? People want to know some of that information. I believe that information that is within the ministerial's departments should be made public, and Deputy Murphy's bill does go some way to meet that. in relation to at least having the orders of 5,000 being presented and published online. This is about open government and transparency, but it should be done as a matter of course. And I would agree with the previous speaker that either the government accept this or reject it. We shouldn't even have to wait for committee stage for this to be done. The minister should come in and say, I'm going to build a calculator, I've got one of my staff to do it, all of the information is available, it should take a matter of days to do it in relation to building the online calculator, and a letter should be issued to all government departments asking them to publish any orders above the value of €5,000.
Deputy Boyd Barrett, you speaking on behalf?
Down as well, or is it just me? Oh, well. Great. Well, first, how much? Oh, great. Oh, no.
You don't have to take it.
Sure. We'll see how we go.
See how you
Thanks, Cian Corla, and thanks to Deputy Murphy for putting forward this bill. And I have to say, I certainly will be supporting it. I think the basic principle is a very, very good principle, that we should have transparency in tax. And I think people very fervently want to know what the hell is going on with their taxes, where are they being spent, and you know, what services and other areas of expenditure are their taxes supporting. So I think the basic principle is very, very good indeed, and is indeed long overdue. I would also like to thank Deputy Murphy for the table, because it is very, very helpful. And while I accept Deputy Doherty's point about the ease with which one might use online calculators and so on, I have to say I'm not quite up to that level of internet use and so on, that it would be that easy for me to do it. I'd have to get somebody with a bit more technical proficiency to assist me in these matters, and I suspect, more importantly, that an awful lot of people out there wouldn't necessarily know how to go and easily access this information. So to have it set out in front of you in that way is actually very, very helpful, and I suspect an awful lot of people would like to have that kind of information to look at what the priorities for spending in different areas are, and to be able to debate them, as you said, as to whether we've got the right priorities in expenditure. So I do think all of that is very useful. And I mean, one particular use, if I might make a slightly political point on this, that one would discover, for example, if you were looking at this and if you were able to compare these year over year, you would discover, for example, that the fact that you might have paid or not paid the household charge made absolutely no difference whatsoever to the amount of expenditure that was going on local government. Because, of course, the budgets were cut prior to the introduction of the charge. So it would help us give lie to the claim made by the government that the household charge was boosting expenditure on local services. It would also be very helpful in indicating the degree to which ordinary taxpayers were bailing out the banks in this country and across Europe for the crisis which those banks have created and visited on ordinary people, and how ordinary people were picking up the tab, and how their taxes, I suppose it would highlight to people how their taxes, if we weren't bailing out banks, if we were repudiating the odious debts that had been imposed on ordinary people, how more than €1,000 a year of the average worker's tax could actually be spent on health and education and other public services. I think that would be very useful information for people to know, and I suspect would be information that would really fuel their anger at the injustice of the bank bailout. So I'm very supportive of the idea. I do think, Deputy, there's a lot of work has to be done on this, and I'm sure Deputy Murphy would want this to be scrutinised and gone over at committee stage, if it does go to the next stage, because I think some very valid points have been raised about the administrative costs and what is the best way to do that. As Deputy Murphy has said, I would favour people getting it in the post, where it is set out in this clear way for them, in a way that people could understand. But obviously we would have to look at the cost, and I think Deputy McGrath has made a very good point, an extremely important point, about the issue of those that are in work and paying tax and those who aren't. And that's something we'd really have to think about, because I don't think we could have a situation where, if you like, some people were the privileged group who we highlighted that they're paying taxes and they get this information, whereas people who are unemployed through no fault of their own, in the vast majority of cases, somehow are made feel as if they are just people who are, you know, not contributing to society, when in fact that is not their fault. So I think we'd have to think carefully about that issue, and I'm not quite sure what the answer to it is. But what I wanted to say beyond that, and generally commending the bill and indicating that I would certainly support it moving to the next stage, and where we could scrutinise it further and look at all these issues, is I do think that we need more information than just this on the issue of tax transparency. I don't think it's just about how or what proportion of the tax that you pay goes to this or that service. There are other very serious issues to do with taxation in this country that I think people would want to know about, and I think which could be added to some sort of information pack that would be sent out to people in whatever way we chose to do that, to give them information about tax. One area I certainly think should be included is, possibly in a pie chart form, is who is paying the tax, what sectors of society are paying the tax, and breaking it down, what proportion of tax are the different sectors paying. In other words, how much of the total tax that is paid, well, first of all, how much is the total tax that is paid in the state, but how much of it is coming from the corporate sector, how much of it is coming from the PAYE sector, how much is coming from the self-employed, how much is coming from excise and so on, how much is not coming from financial transaction tax, for example. But looking at that, because I think that would also give people important information about the way the tax system is structured, and allow them to participate in the debate about how we should structure our tax system, which is, after all, if you like, the most urgent issue really for the whole country at the moment. And I think, for example, people would be, I mean, I put in a lot of questions trying to get to grips with how our tax system works, and it's quite difficult. Eventually you get the information, but you know, tables like this which show earnings, the different deciles and so on, you'd have to give it in a more digestible form. But I think people would be very interested to know that ordinary PAYE workers and the self-employed had gross earnings last year of 83 billion, and they paid 18 billion in tax, whereas the corporate sector last year had total gross earnings before adjustments and allowances had 70 billion of gross earnings and profits, but only paid 4 billion in tax. I think that sort of information would be extremely interesting for people, which shows the effective tax rate for ordinary taxpayers at being, you know, in and around the 30% level, while as the effective tax rate for the corporate sector, generating tens of billions of profits, is only 6% or 6.5% effective tax rate before you have all these write-downs and allowances. So I think that sort of information would be extremely useful and helpful for people. I mean, that's my particular angle on why it would be useful, but I think anybody objectively looking at it would say trying to break down where the tax is coming from, what sectors are paying, how much, what proportion of the overall tax they are paying would be very useful. Would be very useful information for people. And also, I think the issue of tax reliefs and tax allowances is something that, taxes foregone would be something that I frankly would like to know more about. Because when I look at things like the corporate tax issue, but even when you look at effective tax rates for individual earners, whether PAYE or self-employed, and the large number of tax breaks and allowances, I mean, some of them are frankly a mystery. And I think people would like to know a bit more about these, and that sort of information could be included in a tax transparency bill. I mean, it is extraordinary that in the area of corporate tax, 70 billion of gross earnings, and then you have this whole series of allowances. Some of them are titled, for example, other deductions, 4 billion euro, other deductions. What the hell is that? And how, on that basis, are the corporate sector able to write down their tax liability to the point that they are paying a fraction, percentage-wise, of the tax that ordinary workers are paying? Where it shows the incredible anomaly, it seems to me, that, for example, a bank, when they were making profits, would be paying a fraction of the tax that the cleaning lady who's cleaning the floors of the bank is paying in tax. I think people would like to know that kind of stuff. I think also the issue of expenditure within the political system would be a matter that people would be very interested in for further breakdowns of it. How much is being spent on foreign trips, foreign conferences, the expenditure on hotels, per diem expenses, all these kind of things will be the sort of information that I think people would dearly love to know about and would have something to say about. Now, I'm not saying that some, maybe, well, I'll say some. I won't say all or most. I'm not saying some of that expenditure is not justified. Of course it is. It is necessary as part of a global economy and a global an international political system and economic system to have trips abroad. But I think the public have the right to scrutinise in greater detail the extent of this expenditure and be allowed to make judgments on what is justified, what is legitimate and what is not. And I think that would generate necessary oversight and accountability on the issue of people's tax expenditures. Sorry, Councillor Corley, how much time?
Well,
I'm over.
I only realised that Deputy O'Sullivan was supposed to be sharing with you, but I hadn't been told about this. So
sorry, I didn't see her because she wasn't here when I started. Yeah, absolutely. I'll finish. So I support the bill, but let's look at the detail.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's an interesting bill, and I think there's some very practical suggestions in it, looking at the itemised statement of tax and for those paying tax and where they are to be spent, these taxes, those paying the VAT and the excise, and see where that will be spent. And then on the area of procurement, I think it's interesting to publish the purchase orders by governments for more than €5,000. But I'm just looking at the title of it, tax transparency, and it's almost like contradictory, because I think once the word tax comes into the arena, it's almost like the red rag to the bull, and it seems to be a frenzy then to see, well, what are the steps that I can take to avoid paying the taxes and to look for the loopholes and the offshore accounts, and we have so many examples of that. And great ingenuity and innovation that goes into tax avoidance and tax evasion, and we've seen the results of all of that. So anything that adds to transparency in financial affairs, I think, has to be very much welcomed. And we know we're coming into a budget that's going to be difficult, so I think it's absolutely vital that we know where taxes are going. And when we talk about fairness, I think it's only fair that taxpayers see where their taxes are being used, which just might make the pain of paying taxes a little more bearable. We know the household charge and how problematic it has been. And I think one of the arguments has been regarding its use by local authorities, and a sense from people that if they knew that this was actually going into essential local services, whether it's roads or cleaning or public lighting or parks or libraries, it just might have an element of fairness to it. But the sense, of course, is that it's being used to bail out our friends, the bankers and the bondholders. Nobody likes paying taxes, but we know they're a necessary evil, and it's eased when we know that those taxes are being put to good use, and that good use can be seen. Likewise with the VAT and the excise, but I'm not too sure of the practical aspects of that section on estimating the extent of the VAT and the excise. But again, I very much support identifying where the taxes go. Just another point, I think it's vital that we do have a reasoned debate about taxation and the best uses of our taxes. And we know the central areas of healthcare, education, social services, they're paramount. And for people to live decent lives, we have to apply an appropriate system of taxation. So if people go to any or great lengths to avoid paying taxes, then we'll not be living decent lives. And we know between the tax breaks, the non-standard tax reliefs, that there is an essential unfairness. And of course, all of that is aided and abetted by specialised tax accountants and lawyers and private banks. And we have plenty of statistics on what tax dodging results in the billions and trillions being lost to our economies, and very significantly being lost to economies in the developing world. Another aspect on what's involved in the bill, and that has to do with the cost and the staff factors. And I presume that's something that will, you need to go into much greater detail on. And I listened to what you're saying about the online and also about the posting. But I have to agree with Deputy Boyd-Barrett, and I was just with somebody earlier today. There are significant numbers of adults in this country who are computer illiterate. And others who just for their own reasons, they do not want to do things online. And I think that their rights have to be recognised, that they don't want to do all of these items online, they just have an essential objection to it, or either an inability to do that. And I think the bill has to take account of those people. I also, and in the last Dáil I've been on about corporate tax for quite a while. And I would love to know exactly how much of the 12% is actually paid by people. And when we're talking about being transparent for the little people, I think it's of the utmost importance that we are also transparent about those at the other end of the scale. So if this bill is going to be successful for citizens, I think it's much more important that the corporations are also treated and the same standards are applied to those. So the point I would make is transparency, yes, and I very much support that, but it has to be applied across the board. And we look at, just one example, the Troika. Do we know how much that is actually costing us, when they come here? And we've had the debate in private members this week on the excessive pensions and the salaries and the bonuses. There's another area in need of transparency, is where are our taxes invested? And I think there have been some dubious investments in the past, and I'd like to know where exactly these are going. And do we have all the details, for example, on the cost of securing the Corrib oil and the Rossford site? So these are items that our taxes are being paid on, but we don't have enough details on them. And just finally then, on the procurement aspect, in September this year, Minister Howlin published the report, and the estimate of 9 billion, I think, spent by public bodies annually. And he made a point in the speech about how it's essential, and the quote is that maximum value for money is achieved and operational efficiency. So I think what's suggested in the bill will prove beneficial to the small businesses in this country, because we talk an awful lot about job creation, but I think job retention doesn't get the same emphasis. So if your bill, and I'd like to see that teased out a bit more, if that can be doing something on that area, I think then, again, also very much to be welcomed. I think we need to adopt a policy of positive discrimination towards Irish businesses. And of course, this is probably totally anti-EU and whatever, but I think it's our country, and it's our country that we have to save. So I think any steps that can be done for the small businesses in this country, they have to be welcomed, and I'm suggesting the positive discrimination. During the 2 elections that I fought, I was contacted by a number of printing companies who were very concerned that even though it had to be on people's election literature where the printing was done, that there were people in various parties and individuals who were getting around this by using a name in the 26 counties, but their printing was being done elsewhere. So I think we have to take those kind of things on board with procurement. Tax transparency, yes, and I support that aspect of it, but it has to be across the board for everybody.
Thank you, Deputy O'Sullivan. Deputy Griffin.
Thank you, Cahill. What time have I?
Oh, before Deputy Griffin. Yeah. Sorry, Deputy Griffin. I think we're going to have the Minister intervention first. The Minister's going to take precedence over you.
Very much, last Cahill. The bill proposed by Deputy Murphy has some very interesting proposals. His bill aims to provide greater transparency in respect of spending by government departments and agencies in a given year. It aims also to draw a stronger correlation between taxes paid by individuals and state services delivered. The bill is also intended to encourage more responsible budgeting, especially in terms of the preparation of the annual budgets, and to engender public debates around financial planning. I agree with the Deputy that there is considerable merit in making more information available to members of the public in relation to the sources of exchequer income and its expenditure, and in some advanced economies this is the practice already. If people are better informed, then they will better understand the need for current levels of taxation. Not only that, but it will serve to enhance public knowledge of the extensive spending, our vast range of public services, and indeed provide an increased understanding of their cost. The government is very much in favour of transparency and has made considerable progress in this area. Indeed, my colleague, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, has overseen a number of significant changes since we took office. Last December, in the Comprehensive Expenditure Report 2012-14, Mr Hallen announced the new medium-term expenditure framework. As part of this framework, multi-year expenditure ceilings have been set out for each minister and department, and these ceilings form the basis upon which the estimates process is now proceeding. The purpose of this is to provide ministers and their departments, as well as members of the Oireachtas and citizens, with a clear sense of resource allocation, not just for the current year, but for the following year and the year after that. As members are aware, in September the Government published the Ministers and Secretaries Amendment Bill 2012, which will put these ministerial expenditure ceilings onto a statutory footing, which is one of our commitments under the programme. And the provisions of this bill will be discussed and debated in this House over the coming weeks. The introduction of expenditure ceilings allows ministers and departments to plan for the future, something that was unrealistic to expect of them when they did not know what the future looked like. As well as expenditure ceilings, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform also announced the introduction of a whole-of-year budgeting process. One of the key elements in this reform is to provide for greater involvement by members of select committees in the estimate process. In January in this year, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform wrote to all committee chairs inviting them and their committees to avail of this new opportunity to participate in the estimate process in an ex-ante fashion with departments. This is a new process, and it is a significant change for ministers, their departments and committee members. It is nonetheless an important and welcome change in how budgets are prepared and discussed. Of course, it could quite reasonably be argued that the estimates documentation is not especially accessible to members of the public, and for reasons of space and somewhat limited in terms of the information that can be presented. To try and address these issues, the Department of Public Enterprise and Reform launched a pilot whole-of-government performance information portal called Ireland Stat at the end of October. The pilot phase of Ireland Stat covers the following areas: jobs and enterprise development, innovation and agri-food, key features of our economic performance. Secondly, land transport in the transport sector, and thirdly, rural economy, food safety and flood risk management. While this project is still at the pilot phase and covers just 7 of more than 80 programmes, it nevertheless contains a rich and deep volume of information. The pilot Ireland Stat is an important step in developing a public-facing website that makes it easier than ever for members of the public to see how well or otherwise the system of government is delivering public services. The Department of Public Expenditure and Reform also hosts the Databank portal that provides comprehensive information on every aspect of government expenditure over the years. Under this portal, members of the public can create tables and spreadsheets showing how spending on current capital or pay has evolved since 1994, whether for the whole of government or for individual departments. The department also intends to provide information on monthly exchequer data and general government expenditure data. Purchase orders made by every government department and agency will be made available for public scrutiny. I might now focus more on the specific tax aspects of the Deputy's proposals. This bill proposes the provision to each person paying income tax of an annual statement detailing tax paid, the estimated tax payments to be made in the coming tax year, and a breakdown of government spending on which the taxpayers' taxes are spent. In order to implement this proposal, there are a number of practical concerns about the obligations set down in this bill. It is important at the outset to remind ourselves that we have a self-assessment tax system, so business and individuals in the self-assessment system already know how much tax they have paid in any given year, and they are in a much better position than the Revenue Commissioners to estimate how much they will pay in the coming year. Regarding the PAYE sector, the position is that employees and occupational pensioners already obtain details of their tax paid on an annual basis from their employers by means of the P60 forms. The provision of the same data, again, as proposed by this bill, would be a duplication of efforts and perhaps, therefore, an expensive and unnecessary use of public service resources. The bill